살아계도 his play fuck it I'm many who done it so done it so done it I don't give a fuck there's no what you wouldn't hold so get a word to get it take a real cousin but not it I draw it I'm not you rock it just so I'm me I said it I hope she's a you ain't to get the city I look to run a stern
Okay. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Ephemeral One, and welcome to my definitive and something I've been brewing for a long time. Ladies and gentlemen, one of my favorite series is the Demon Souls, Dark Souls, otherwise known as the Soulsborne series. And I'm a purveyor of a very unpopular thing that every game is connected. They were not necessarily all the same thing, but they were all connected in one way or another. I believe that there was possible to create a timeline of events that connected each and every game to one another. And I think I've come across it, and I think I know how it works. So, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to explain the timeline of the Soulsborne games. As you might see, in the far right corner, I've made a nice cute little graphic just to simplify things for you all. While my own notes here are actually a bit more complicated, but not by much more. Still, there's some more to be seen, but let's go over what games I consider part of the Soulsborne timeline. These would be, as I have them lined up here, even in my hotbar, in the order that I believe they are. They are being, Elden Ring is the earliest time point in the timeline, followed by Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, then Demon Souls takes place here, and Bloodborne is at the furthest end of the storyline. But how do we get from one to the other? Well, I'll explain that shortly, but I want to make sure you're clear on some points going in. Sekiro is not part of the Soulsborne game in that they is created by FromSoft. It is largely a retelling of an alternate history of a historical events. Thus, it is not canon to the existence of the rest of the Soulsborne series. I want that to be up right out the bat. That's why Sekiro is not on here. It has nothing to do with my personal biases towards it. It just is, it's a retelling of Japanese history. It was just a what-if scenario of what would be cool if. You know what I mean? So I want that up front. Then from there, I suppose we can get into, the way I divided it. The way for my notes I made sure to help make this more possible and more organized is I divided this all up into ages. Okay? And each age... Actually, I should show you all. So here, give me 1 second, and I'm going to add a browser window to the screen so we can go down it together. So, document. Okay. Okay, and then we'll add a 3-column. Okay. Okay. So then we'll add a what am I looking for? Tools, table, building table. 3 rows, right? Yep. So yeah, do 3x6 to start this off, and we'll start with. Okay, let me put this on the screen actually. So add a browser window. Okay. And we will add. Copy. Yeah, I should have prepped this sooner. Sorry about that. It didn't occur to me that I should. Okay. Alright. Oh, for fuck's sake. Okay. Okay. So, how's another way to do this? Okay, so that's not gonna work. Yeah, if I'm not gonna use Google Docs. Well, I could. I just need to use. Okay, rather than browser, just do window. Doi. Window capture. Yeah. Okay. That'll work. And then we just need to shrink it down. And we'll leave it up. We'll leave it down here in bottom. We'll make it even smaller and shrink it down to bottom left. And then I'll just zoom in. Okay. There, that should make this bigger. And yeah. Okay. So how's that looking on OBS? Not great. Okay. Now I can just hide it for now, and we'll just bring it up as we need it. Yeah, that'll be the easiest way to do it. Okay. Sorry, I should have handled that earlier. My bad. I didn't know. I didn't think of that. But anyway. So actually, no, we can leave it up because this is going to be important for now as I talk about and we begin the story in Elden Ring, and we start in our first age. Now, the other thing we will need to know about: who is the ruler that controls the age, and what god, if any, is present that is behind them. Now, this is something critical to understand, because when discussing Elden Ring especially, we tend to get wrapped up in talking about the gods, right? Gods got, God, the term demigod, god, and such are frequently thrown around, oftentimes confusing what we mean by this, okay? In this case, another term that might be more useful is god, ruler, slash vessel, I believe would be probably the of the age. Because ruler tends to imply that it's the person who's in control of everything, and that's not necessarily true. The person who is the ruler might also just be a vessel for the god that is holding power. That is one of the key things that a lot of people miss about the Dark Souls series. The person in charge is not necessarily in control. They may just be the linchpin holding everything together. So, with that said, overall, before we delve into the nitty-gritty, before we start getting into the details, what is the story of the Soulsborne games? What do you believe is the title, is the entire point of the series? It is a chronicling, in my eyes, it is a chronicling of the way, of the changes that undergo and the attempts at making perfection out of imperfection. The attempts of survival and trying to better oneself and the world around you. It is the attempts of making everything better. And all too often, we are shown that it falls flat. And it will fall flat again and again and again. But that is the way it was, and that's the way it is. So, how far back in my timeline can we actually measure to know? As far as I can tell, there were ages beforehand. I want that to be clear. However, there are also, this is the earliest age we can confirm anything about and confirm what it is. So, without further ado, let's begin with the first game in the timeline, Elden Ring. So, we put this away for right now, for a moment, while we go in. Elden Ring is our first stop, ladies and gentlemen. And Elden Ring we will have to spend a bit of time on, because there's a conclusion a lot of people make that I don't agree with and isn't actually true. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is there's a belief of mine. In studying all the games, in understanding the lore of all the Soulsborne games, Elden Ring stands out in one major particular way. Almost every other game has some exclusion to each of its endings. Elden Ring does not. Aside with a few exceptions, you can get almost every ending of the 6 altogether. Why is that important? Because I will tell you now. To me, I'll be honest, this is because I believe for the older Souls games to exist, this game has to have every single ending happen. Every single ending takes place. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin here in Marika's hometown, the Shaman Village. Because to understand the story of Elden Ring, you have to understand one crucial point here. This is understanding Marika's journey that will bring to light so much of what the world is. And we have to start here, because here in the land of shadows is where Marika's journey actually begins. Here in this humble little village, hidden behind the Shadow Fort, the Shadow Keep. This fortress held by the Shadow Lord. This place was known for sacrifices. It was known to harvest many people. In fact, the shaman village, it was sort of almost a mocking name. The shaman village was a beautiful, quiet little place where anyone born without horns was brought and kept, and in some cases bred, for the sake of sacrifices. You have to understand, Marika's story is not the furthest back we can go, though. But it is worth noting, this is where, with the DLC, we were finally told where Marika's journey began. A soft, quiet village, tucked away behind a fort. Humble houses here tell us of the simple life here. But unfortunately, this is not where the earliest we can confirm. In fact, for the earliest age in the most ancient history, we have to leave here and go back to the lands between. Now, where to see? Now, it's interesting. We'll go here. The bestial sanctuary. I have a question for you. This is known as the lands between. Between where? I'm curious. Any answers? Well, it's simple. The whole of the lands between. You ever notice it looks like there's a chunk missing in the middle of it? Take a look at this map. There are several things to note of it that are odd, to say the least. The central area here, almost as if they were missing, as something had been ripped apart in the middle. Then, if we come out here, take a look here. Along all the coasts of the lands between, you can see this. There's a crevice, rather sharp. It's most noticeable here, and we can see that the water is flowing out and down. So all the water from here is flowing from this inner sea area down and out to the ocean. Now, the other thing to note, the position. It flows out and towards this storm here that we know as the crumbling ruin, Faru Azul. Almost as if that crumbling ruin might have been here at one point. And there's a definite crease along almost around the entirety of this land, the entirety of this island. The reason being is that the earliest age we can actually trace it back to in this game would be the age of red lightning. At least that's what I call it, because it's named after its ruler, Placidusax. More specifically, Dragon Lord Placidusax. We don't even know the name of his god. But that is the first age we can tell. Because the first truth I'm going to give you all is the lands between used to be one massive landmass supported and flying with the power of the god of Placidusax. If you've ever wondered where so many of these fallen towers are across the island, yeah, the reason the water is flowing down and out is because there's a crease and there's a crevice that they're descending into. Because this island fell on top of something else, something that was there already. But yeah, during the Age of Red Lightning, crumbling Farum Azula ruled over Placidusax as the Elden Lord. This was his throne. Think about how you get here. You have to go and enter a little palace, and then time is reversed to bring you to his throne. Look at the size of the pillars, the scale of this. And it doesn't seem impossible then, and you think about it, that Placidusax held all of this aloft. All of this was the domains of the Dragon Lord. A massive island that he moved across the world to his will and whim. We'll come back to this later. This depiction. That's something else. But it is worth noting that every species, every race, except one, was here. And note, why did they? Now that's the question. Why was this island so important? Why? It comes down to the burial principles. Take a look again at all the ways creatures are buried here. Note anyone anyone who died here in this place, the dead were displayed in places of honor. They were celebrated. And this has led some people to believe that Placidusax's god would be the Lomine Queen, the Queen of the Black Flame. No, though she would take much from me. No, the Queen was another vessel, much like fear. The interesting thing, the system to note about Elden Ring, is the way things work in Elden Ring, is the god is intangible. The gods are not physical direct beings. They are things they are entities that exist but require vessels to exert their power and control. This is due to their very nature being intangible. So they require a vessel capable of harnessing their power through. Yep. Now, we won't get into it for a while yet, but much of what you're seeing in Farum Azula is something that took hold long after everything else. Bear in mind, keep that in mind, that not everything you see as we see it in the game is the same as it was historically. This place was a thriving metropolis under Placidusax. These beastmen were the regular common people. They were here to do, live, share dreams, make art, eat, sleep, live. We can see traces of it in the pottery, the planters. The fact that the plants are still growing to this day shows just how well and developed the society was. The intricacy on the faces and artwork, the stonework of these, this is an ancient city that was well developed. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to appreciate the idea that as much as we see of it, we never get to see the glory of this place. So I want you to understand that even seeing crumbling Farum Azula, the capital Farum Azula, was indeed a metropolis almost without parallel, and probably may never be in the lands between. But it is worth noting that crumbling Farum Azula is the inevitable fate, in that one thing that was present is this was the home of not only the beastmen, but the ancient dragons. The wielders of the followers of Placidusax. Which were the ancient dragons. Now, why is that important? is because red lightning was their weapon, not because it was the most devastating thing, but because red lightning was the thing that could hurt other dragons. Placidusax often often pushed his dragons to, fight amongst each other so only the strongest would survive and the strongest would rule. Then what we have is a culture of warriors, of combat. And at the end of the day, Placidusax was built on faith. It's the reason red lightning spells are miracles. I don't know if I have them all ready. Let's see. Yeah. Lanciax was the sister of Fortisax, and it is said she took the form of a human to commune with the knights as priestess of the ancient dragon cult. Yeah, Red Lightning, the Age of Red Lightning, was ruled over by Placidusax. And again, that is where the lands between come from. The reason the land betweens are called that is because they were the lands between the heavens and earth. And it is only because of one event that this island is the way it is. And that would be, we'll have to go deep underground to, Nokron, the Eternal City, home of a race of people called the Nox. Simple enough. Again, remember that how we see these cities now are not how the cities were in the past. Nokron was one of several cities of the Nox. A group of people who studied and learned and tried to master alchemic arts to be able to replicate and create a god they could control. These creatures here are nothing but wonders, but these guys here are nothing but scavengers that came in. Dispatched, I believe, specifically by the school, but I might be off on that one. But I believe something like they were dispatched by the school, and well, they died down here and never made it back. But yeah. The Nox, the Nokron, were seeking to make, using their silver tier technology, we're seeking to make gods capable of, basically create a being capable of mimicking even a god. They're intelligent priests and such. What we're seeing here are the remnants of the Nox. But it is worth noting, these doll soldiers are not the actual Nox themselves. They are simply a form the Nox took afterwards. These are the defenders left in the city when things went bad. Then when the leftover slimes from their early experiments stationed and meant to guard the city. Now the question is why? If these were in fact the people who lived here, why did they need someone to stay? Why did they need to replicate, the city still being occupied? Well, The Nox, though they believed they were being punished for their actions against the gods. More specifically, because the Nox, by being creators of the Finger Slayer blades and other techniques, managed to sought to control a god, but they weren't blessed with one themselves. Or rather, and it's one of those things where they had access to understanding, but they were not blessed with the god themselves. So, what the Nox decided to do was take one from one who were. So, what would happen is, Placidus Axis brought the lands between, passing overhead. And the Nox took their chance. They stole the god they somehow stole the god of Placidus Ax, causing the lands between to start to crumble, to fall. And Placidus Ax's power was only great enough to save the capital, Farum Azula. With removing the fire god, the god we know that he worshipped, Placidus Ax, their homes, their eternal cities, were crushed beneath the rest of the lands between. Believing that the greater will of the universe had come to interfere rather than gravity, they decided to create copies, puppet soldiers, that could occupy, and slimes to occupy their eternal cities, while the Nox themselves departed. Now, understand that, and that tells us a lot of things. Not the least of which, there are plenty of places all across the lands between where we'll find these statues. The statues of someone without tentacles sort of growing out of them and holding a tablet. We can find this statue all over the lands between. The Nox were great builders and loved to build to remember their origins. Remember that how we see things are not necessarily how they always were. The most prime example, when we get back to Marika, I'll explain later. For now, it is worth noting that Nocron, Noxtella, and of course, the city, the nameless city, were all locations here long before the arrival of the Golden Order. In fact, yeah. But with the fall of Placidus Ax, a different sort rose to power. Placidus Ax's god was gone. The Nox, punished, hid underground. Though it is worth noting, a lot of people will say the stars here down here are beautiful and were just like a reminder for them of the night sky they lost when their city was crushed beneath the lands between. No. Actually, these stars are the shield that held the island up. It's no coincidence these huge places survived. The magic of the Nox was strong enough to capture a literal god. They had shields around their cities that withstood a continent falling on them. I will state again, they had magic strong enough that this survived, that what you're looking at is not just a pretty recreation of the sky. No, this was the magic that allowed them to actually hold back this place, hold back in the continent dropping onto them and burying them underground. The Nox were not to be trifled with. But, of course, the Nox weren't the ones who gained control. Being buried underground was the start of a series of misfortunes. Though they were right that they had upset the greater will with their actions against the gods. In fact, whenever they had managed to capture Placidusax's god, it managed to call out to the greater will. And what would happen is there would be an influx of creatures called from the void. That's why there's Estelle, who was capable of stealing these stars. Why there are multiple Estelles is because this plague was called out by the Nox, called down by the Nox when they stole the god of Placidusax. But that would not be the end of things. Of course not. There's too much farther to go. Placidusax was merely the first step in creating the world we know of Elden Ring. I just wanted to show you this, to remind you that yes, there is the city without a name underneath the Erd Tree, the nameless eternal city. This is where its power was taken. The Estelle by Estelle. The nameless eternal city was one of several. Noxtella, Nocron. The Nox had multiple cities. Alright. And then, now most notably, the next place. So then, what age came after? Okay, the lands between fall. And the island is shaken, but survivors exist. Money survivors exist. And if you've ever been curious about all the tower debris scattered across the lands between, well, those are the remnants of the towers that stood upright at one point. They simply fell over when the island collapsed. It's just that simple. At one point, I considered the possibility that, Farum Azula had discarded them, flung them across, but they're too prevalent in too many places. No, the entirety of the island, there is almost no place that there is none of the tower debris. And that makes sense because this whole island was all controlled. Anyway. So then who took control next? What age came after Placidusax's fall to the Nox? Well, it would be the strongest of those who had remained and survived the fall. Next would become the Age of Ice. heralded by the giants and their god of fire. So, we have our next age. The giants and the worship of giants spread across the lands between pretty easily. As you might imagine, giants were easy to understand. The Age of Ice, led by the Giant King, their god of fire. That was the next age. The Age of Ice, where fire and warmth were heralded and worshipped. Oh, most of my notes. Yep. To do that. There we go. The Age of Ice, where warmth was worshipped and needed, where people gathered under the giants for their protection. Eventually leading to the creation of their forge. The Forge of the Giants. This incredible construct was held up by these massive chains. And even now, the flames of the forge keep burning. It's incredible. It's incredible. And yeah, it's easy to understand how the giants took control and how they became a central figure. It's also how, but the giants were brutal to the nth degree. And thus, like even the Zamor, one of the races that was enslaved and would never really break free, are the Zamorians. The Zamorians were now were enslaved and used as labor. You can see that in the fact that the Zamor never get out of the cuffs, the chains that bind them. While the giants would never reach their heights again, it is worth noting that the giants did also crossbreed as well as create alliances. Up here in the north, especially, they were allies with astrologers who were known for making pacts with wolves and living up here in the north, the lands between. Let's see. And though now, in modern times in Elden, the giants are scattered, few, and wrapped around with these penitent thorns, it is worth noting they were at one point the greatest power in the lands between. And it's not hard to see why. Each giant also bore in the middle of their stomach an eye. That eye would connect them to the god of fire, and would enable them to access powerful flames. The worship of the giants spread across all of the lands between, thus seeing those giant statues, the colossi statues we see all across the island. They came because the worshippers of the giants did, and the worship of giants persists to this very day, and so it's easy to see proof of that. But the Giants didn't maintain their control. I won't say not for very long. It was an age of their own time. But their king would be killed. And that would bring us to the third age here in the lands between. Unfortunately, there's no central area noteworthy to the third age. This is because the third age belonged to a very specific character. The age of death, belonging to the Lomide Queen. We don't know, and we do not know her exact deity. We know she had one, and one as she was chosen as a vessel, but we don't know what it was exactly. The Queen of Death wielded an iteration. She would be an offshoot of the original giants. The Lomide Queen was a sort of mutation run rampant. Her own black flame versus the giant's own red. Unfortunately for the giants, her black flame would prove too much. The giant king would fall because of the potency of those flames. There's no central location, but I suppose if I had to pick anywhere to show this off, down to the basements of the Divine Tower, I suppose. Because these followers of the Black Flame they wear firemonk garb, altered, no longer the bright red, but the white and pristine. Their black flame, they're still of an opponent, even if they were powerful enough. So that would be the next stage. The Lomide Queen would take control of the lands between, not choosing to wipe out her enemies, but choosing to instead take control of them, mocking them by wielding her black great sword, her black flame great sword, that would spew, that would be eventually sealed away by the successor to her. But I wanted to at least acknowledge what happened is the Queen of Death brought about the end of it, brought about the end of the Age of Giants by altering the flame. She would rule most of this land from here in Lane Dale. It's a little too destroyed now for us to really know much. But we can know with full assurance that at the time she took control, it was spread wide. Finally, bringing us back all all the way back to where we started. In the little shaman village. Yep. Now, we don't know far back enough to be able to tell where anything too far historically back on behalf of the Shadowlands. What we can piece together is that at the end of the day, Marika was one of the shamans here. More than likely one of the last ones. Let's see. Yep. The golden braid. Queen Marika's offering to the grandmother. Boosts holy damage negation by the utmost. What was her prayer, her wish, her confession? There was no one left to answer, and Marika never returned home again. There's a lot of weight to that. More than likely, Marika's only wish, confession, and prayer, there was no one left to hear it, which tells us that there was no one left in the village. Which leads to a very somber and sad truth. Marika is the last of her village, of her people. And she was indeed. When she left, when someone in her, who heard her prayer, her confession, her wish, well, there's a simple, honest truth to it. There was one thing that heard her prayer. And that would be the two fingers. So, it would be easy to surmise that what happened is either all of the either all of her village were killed or offered up as sacrifices or tried and rebelled and failed. It's unclear that much what led to it. But it is clear also that these homes were empty. There was no one left. Only Marika remained. In a quaint little quiet place. Yeah. I imagine this was an outwork house. But yeah. Quaint, quiet little place. Yeah. You could look out past the Shadow Fort. You could look out to some areas. The Shadow Fort always looming over you. The sacrificial place, not far either. So, then the question becomes, what happened? Well, the one who heard Marika's prayer and responded, well, they're not far away. The finger creepers, the two fingers. fingers are curled up. Unless you attack them. And most of them get past the slugs and the fingers. The slugs here are more so more primordial. And in fact, these are actually indicative of something much, much later in the time. But what's most important to know is the way the finger creepers exist. As the slugs. It's worth noting because at the end of the day, that shows that so was directed to go to Marika and inform her that she was in fact an Imperium, someone chosen by the greater will of the universe, with the capacity to be a king, a vessel of the holy power. And Marika's God. But unfortunately for her, she had the powers. As we can see, her powers did not start strong. The tree in the village is actually created by her first attempt at a miracle. It's a far shallow creation. But what it would enable is her to begin to take control of others. Marika's magic and powers would allow her to exert and manipulate others. And she chose wisely on the first person she used her powers on would be Horalu, the greatest of the warriors of the Shadow Lord. And in taking them, and in taking that person, she fled from the Shadowlands, arriving somewhere we know very well. We know because, well, it's how we get to the Shadowlands. And it's the only place that makes sense. And there's land between. This is the prime example of how things that we see as they are not what they were. Famously, this is known as Mog's Palace. But the truth is, this place existed well before Mog was even born. This was one of the Nox cities. Before him and his dynasty of blood, yeah, this was all Nox. They simply slaughtered them and took over. And the way we get into the lands between, well, it's how Marika got to the lands between. How she got from the Shadowlands to here is she arrived here amid the Nox. And Marika was granted two big boons when she was revealed to be an Imperium. The first was her ability to control others and empower them. The second was Malekith. She would tell people her half sibling, but the shadow that would follow her to ensure that she never went out of line. Marika never really relied on it, and in truth, it's pretty clear from what I can tell, Marika never fully trusted the two figures. Their guidance and assistance, their miracles and powers were useful, but she was always a little skeptical on what they were actually getting out of helping her. But she played the role and came here. The Nox were at first unsure what to do with her and hers, but eventually they would be ushered out of the city and would be brought, because if you'll remember, the teleporter here for the palace approach, well, we follow her journey backwards. Here in Mogwin Palace, how do you get here in the first place? Because Marika never actually saw the other Nox cities. Well, to be teleported here, you actually end up all the way back here in the sacred, consecrated snowfields. Marika's journey actually began up here in the north. And where she was sent would be here, Ordina, the liturgical city. For those unfamiliar, the phrase liturgical usually refers to holy or works of a church or organized religion. This was a holy city that saw the connection and competition of various religions. Here we would see the Nox's greatest works, the various sisters and the various creations and artificial life that they did. In addition, the Nox would be known as the new men in this area to pass off any relations to them. Not that they looked any different. Then, of course, the apostate derelict, showing that they had cast out some. Yilog Anix, which would be one of the worshippers. And most importantly, now, It being the connection, or Dina being the connection to the Holling tree, wouldn't come till much later. Because the fact is, the Holling tree is a creation of Mikkel. But the giant worshippers, the Zamor, there were countless other religious groups out here, competing and whatnot. And how do we know that this is the first place Marika came? Well, where is it? It's on the shore of the church. On the shore, this is the first church of Marika. It's just that simple. Marika's first church was here, seeking to preach her word and gain power of influence and followers. She would seek to gain enough to challenge the current ruler, and that would be, again, the Lomide Queen who was nested firmly in her control of Langdale. Marika would draw in power from every group she could, being a unique church where she would, rather than where so many have been divided by their worship of the giants, the worship of, the fighting between the followers of the giants versus the followers of the Lomide Queen, the followers of, all the other deities around. Marika offered her golden order, which would encompass, accept, and incorporate everyone. And she would grow powerful in this area. Ordina would be her greatest venue for control and power, eventually working her way back towards the city of Langdale, forcing out, and would eventually force out the Lomide Queen and force her out of the city and to flee. The exact end or defeat of her would not be public. In fact, it's largely unknown if she's dead or alive, but the fact that we find the Lomide Queen's great personal greatsword in the bottom of a divine tower speaks volumes. No, it may be guarded, but it is also guarded by one of her children, by a follower of hers. So, more than likely, she fled and was intent on taking her sword and bringing back more power to help her. She never got the chance. Malekith got to her, assassinated her in a single quiet moment, and her children were left, her followers were left not known. The Godskin nobles would continue their fight to resist the upstart that would be Marika, which brings us to her age of gold. The Age of Gold, led by Marika the Eternal, and her god of the Elden Beast, avatar of control. Insert row below, and a couple more, because we got plenty more to go. So, the Age of Gold would see the rise of Marika and the Golden Order. This would be where much of the story of the game actually takes place, and where a lot of the setup comes. So, Marika's Age of Gold. She would rise to power, her children would grow and expand their influence, and we would see them become known as demigods. Now, that's important. That's actually that not that's going to be surprising to say, but it's actually not that important. The only thing that I will contribute to one thing I've noticed a lot of people when they try to piece this story together. Excuse me one sec. Is one thing is her children. As far as I can tell, Marika has a grand total. Marika, well, we can talk about this story now, and it'll be open. Marika and Radigan are the same person, correct? Marika. Now, it's always been interesting. This design of Marika. The first thing to note about it, this is the depiction of her. First off is the positioning of her herself. That is not the position of someone in power or in control. Her arms are hung limply, as if she is at the mercy of something else. No. Truth be told, when Marika took Lane Dale, she had fallen into the Two Fingers trap. This is the thing a lot of people seem to miss. Marika and Radigan are not the same person. They share a body, they do not share a will. Marika is a slave and unfortunately controlled by the thing you see behind her. Its shifting, roiling form. That is the Elden Beast. That is what's controlling and altering her, sabotaging her will. Let's see, I believe Leighton Dale, we can, oh no wait, it's not up anymore because I'm that far in the story, but, right, and if you follow it, the church is the first, the second church, yeah. Second Church of Marika, Stormcaller Church. Let's say, is it the Stormcaller? I forget which one has the statue of Radigan. Bellum Church, pretty sure I was gonna say, I cannot remember for the life of me. Second Church of Marika, Stormcaller. Well, we'll look. But yeah, Marika and when making the pact with the Elden Beast, Marika basically was taken over. Not completely. It was definitely a split. Let's put it that way. Worth noting. Yeah. In the Stormcaller Church, look, it's very different. Radigan's position. The controls, the lattice behind him, all seem far more less like a controlling and more that he's being supported by it. He's a puppet just the same, but it's because that is what's making him. Let's see. Let's see. No, I don't have it on this one. Okay. But yeah. Yeah. Radigan basically was the alter ego of Marika. So, between Radigan and Marika, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 children. It is worth noting. Now, the exact order I could not tell you off the top of my head, but I can tell you that the children she had was Godwin the Golden and Mesmer. It is worth noting Mesmer is one of the interesting ones because if I had to imagine, if I had to put them in an order, Marika's first child was with Horalu, otherwise known as Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. Okay? That is one of the key things here. Marika technically wasn't the ruler, she was considered the god behind the ruler. Okay? But we know that that isn't true. That's something a lot of people are misunderstanding. Godfrey was not the actual Elden Lord. Marika was. Like with many things, Marika put on a front and misled people. At the end of the day, if you want to know you want to understand that Marika was a planner, a schemer. She was not the type to fight openly if she could avoid it. If she could, she would send Godfrey to do the dirty work. And she did, time and time again. We know for a fact Godfrey was one of her most potent and usable weapons. Radigan, the alternate persona, continued to make trouble for her. But if I have to give you a basic idea of the way things went for the Age of Gold, Marika had a child with Godfrey. This would be Godwin. At the same time, Radigan went and impregnated Renala, leading to their first child, Mesmer. However, despite being being separated and children of two different sides, there was a sort of constant rivalry between those two. Mesmer also, because remember, a lot of people take it as Mesmer was the always protective of his little sister. Most people have been taking that as to mean Melina. I don't believe that's the case. I believe Melina, it was the result of both Radigan trying to somehow, I'm not entirely sure how the process works, but Melina was the first child for Marika and Radigan, attempting to have a child. What they got is a child of, basically, it's got a child who's God, because remember, each child Because here's the thing about every child Marika ends up having. They are tied to a different deity that would take over for the Elden Beast if they ascended to godhood. Okay? If they ascended to Elden Lord, they would basically be replacing the Elden Beast as the new god ruling over the ring. Over the basically what the ring is a method of control for the world and shaping it. So, in such a case, Godfrey, in this case, Godwyn and the three first children in my mind, Godwyn with Godfrey, Melina, and then Melina and Mesmer. These were your first three children. Melina was killed or as soon as she could be, started to awaken the power of the Three Finger. Basically the flame of chaos. Understanding this, Melina accepted her death. I believe she was conscious of it. It's why, at the end of the day, she was the one who... that's the reason that's the only ending wherein she is alive and she is swearing vengeance on you for what you did. Okay. From there, so those three are born. Then, from there it's kind of muddled, but I would say then Rena, Ronnie, and one lost sister was born along with Radon and Rykard. Then Godwyn had some children of his own. Then Godfrey and Marika had Log and Morgoth, who were basically banished to the sewers. Eventually the Moradigan tries one more time, and that results in Mikla and Millennia. The exact order doesn't really matter too much in the grand scheme of things. The whole point is, she had a ton of children. Marika had so many kids. And, well, each time she became more and more convinced and assured of one major problem. The Erd Tree was growing powerful. The Erd Tree had grown so powerful, in fact, that it could take control of her. Not just her, but anyone she chose to. The problem is, Marika was understanding something. After a certain point, the tree would be unstoppable. The Earth tree would eventually grow large enough, potentially, to wipe out every bit of life on this planet. But Marika was in too deep. I mean, she even had Radigan going around, touting the Golden Order and making choices for her. She was a slave in effect, once again. So how does one rebel? Thankfully, she had choices and options. They weren't good for her, but they would be good for the future. So Marika set up what she could. Marika began to study. Marika began to research. She gathered secrets and understanding. This is known as the Queen's Bedchamber. This is Marika's room. It is laden and just swarmed with these tablets. we know where these tablets come from. Each and every one of them was knowledge that the Nox had acquired. So I want you to take a moment and think of this. Marika studied at the heel of the Nox, a society of magicians strong enough to steal a god. But she would need this knowledge and power to resist the one that had taken hold. However she did it, she studied all the Nox's secrets, and she managed to come up with a plan. It wasn't a good plan, it was the only plan she could come up with. And thus she set into motion what would lead to the shattering. The shattering of the Elden Ring, or in other words, the damaging of the Elden Beast and its control over the land. Remember how I mentioned that the tree and the way things are, how we see them now in the current is not how they were in the past. However the control between her and Radigan worked, Radigan wasn't completely aware of what she was doing. And somehow she managed to craft a hammer, a weapon, that would be capable of shattering and damaging something as powerful as the Elden Beast. And when it did, the tree weakened. And it wouldn't be until the shattering that everything truly fell apart. Marika's punishment was to be drawn into the tree and effectively sealed in there, imprisoned, only basically held in place until Radigan could theoretically try and fix things. But that would be how she'd set things up. Unfortunately, what would come next would be our role in the story, folks. This is where in Elden Ring we come into play. And this, ladies and gentlemen, would lead us, and I do mean the word us, into this story. The big point I want to make here is that at the end of Elden Ring, there are 6 possible endings. All of them happen. I know, that seems impossible. That can't possibly be right. There's no path that could possibly allow one person to do everything you needed to do to be able to, get to the, there's no way anyone could do every little option, make every little choice that would lead to each of the endings. And you're right. But the thing you've forgotten is, we're only one Tarnished that we play as, but it wasn't only one Tarnished that was chosen. Let's go over now something that most people forget about. What are the Tarnished? Why are they called the Tarnished? They're called Tarnished because we are imperfect. We are ones who have died. We are members of the golden lineage that have died. That perfect golden luster is no more on us, because we fell in combat, died, and our afterlife was to be brought here to the lands between. It's just that simple. Now, and who do we fight here? Do you remember? Horalu, Godfrey the Elden Lord. The truth is, Marika had every intention of taking the Elden Beast with her. So she sent out Oralu. She sent out her strongest warrior to go and survive and die out in the world. But she underestimated how strong Oralu really was. The truth of the matter is, the difference between us and Godfrey is one simple, sad truth. Godfrey never lost a fight. He was no longer blessed by gold, but he was still golden. That's the reason when he finally dies, he'd be reborn, but at that point, those who beat him have already entered the tree. In fact, 6 of them. We know because there would be 6 possible endings and 6 possible ages. And that's the truth. All 6 of them happen. Each one of them carrying a piece of the Elden Beast within them. And this would lead us to our next age, the Age of Strife, as I call it. This ruled over by the Tarnished Lords, Tarnished Victor Lords. And there is no god of this age. That's just it. There's no god of this age. They slew him and took its power. The Tarnished Victors created a time where they fought and contended with each other. This battle would actually extend out from beyond even from the lands between. This is where this would lead to the simple truth that all 6 happen. The Lord of Chaos destroys the Elden. Let's see, going down the list of enemies. One of them rises as the Elden Lord of the age, they call it the Age of Fracture, where they accept the power of the Elden Ring and in its broken state tries to make do with it. Meanwhile, 3 of them attempt to fix the ring, imbue it with new power to revolutionize and remake the world as they need to. They use a broken ring of undeath, of death and life, a rune of mending, and a rune of curse. And one of them is taken over by the Lord of Chaos, the Frenzied Flame, the one who had touched the 3 fingers, or rather been touched by the 3 fingers. And one of them kneels before Ronnie, the mission done, and she departs, taking with her as much of the power of the world as she can to take in her 1,000-year journey across the stars. But the wars, the Age of Strife continues, bickers, fights, and that's the end of that part. And that would be the end of Elden Ring. The Age of Strife continues on. However, that's not the last thing we have to discuss, because let's see. Because you have to remember, here in Farum Azula, we can see that based on the way the place is, it's falling apart. The power of Placidusax that was holding it together won't last forever. This place will, eventually, come apart completely. Then the question is, what happens then? So what happens? Well, for one thing to note about Faru Missoula is, yep, one thing to remember about it is that it is absolutely overrun with the beastmen in undead form. That's the thing to always remember about it. These are all undead, living in death, so to speak. You can tell from their decayed forms and the way they're moving, the way their arms and bodies are so scraggly that their faces are almost ripped off. Yeah, no, these are corpses that are just up and moving around, living in death. And the amount of death bloom around the area just cements this. Now, why is that important? Well, this place is falling apart, but there's something that was still here. More importantly, or rather, who lived here were the dragons, the ancient dragons. Though I've cleared out most of them, you can still see them in the distance. Ancient dragons still lived here and still stayed here. And they would stay protected by stay protected by Lucidasax's power. Now, why is that important? Because they're with all the tarnished. Didn't mean to drop that. The tarnished lords would basically be bickering, fighting, contending for power, position, and every advantage they could on the other lords. And it is indeed a tragedy on some levels. But it's also worth noting the reason I am spending so much time telling the story of Elden Ring is because here, once again in Nocron, we can see something very important. At the very back, we see here a field of water with stone pillars reaching towards the sky in strangely regular intervals. These trees, these stone pillars, it's worth noting that this would be two of the trademarks of the last age that Elden Ring tells us about. And that, ladies and gentlemen, would be known as the Age of Grey. With the with all the lords competing against each other, eventually what would actually end up winning out would be the ancient dragons. With their stone scales under no god. Once again, much like the tarnished victors, there's no god for them. They just simply were. And that's just it. That's the story of Elden Ring. A goddess, a woman consumed by vengeance, gets in too deep and eventually leads a war and sells her soul, realizing that she will doom the rest of the world and trying to prevent that eventuality. That is what is the story of Elden. Is Marika a hero, a big rebellion symbol? On some levels, yes, but on others, it was a mess of her own making. Her own greed and hubris and desperation to avenge those who fell before her. There are countless other stories to be told, but this is the start of the story. And it leads us to, like I said, the Age of Grey, where we can say goodbye to Elden Ring for now. And we can move on to the next part of the story. Dark Souls 1. Now these will be much shorter because these ages, there's so many of them that I can largely group many of them together. This is because in Dark Souls 1, the more thematic and story we're telling is the more thematic story we're looking to tell here actually the opening cutscene.
In the age of ancients,
Dragons.
The world was unformed, shrouded by fog. A land of grey crags, arch trees, and everlasting dragons. But then there was fire, and with fire came disparity. Heat and cold, life and death, and of course, light and dark. Then from the dark they came and found the souls of lords within the flame. Nito, the first of the dead. The Witch of Izalith and her daughters of Chaos. Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight, and his faithful knights. And the furtive pygmy, so easily forgotten. With the strength of lords, they challenged the dragons. Gwyn's mighty bolts peeled apart their stone spears. The witches weaved great firestorms. Nito unleashed a miasma of death and disease. And Seath the Scaleless betrayed his own, and the dragons were no more. Thus began the Age of Fire. But soon the flames will fade, and only dark will remain. Even now, there are only embers, and man sees not light, but only endless nights. And amongst the living are seen carriers of the accursed dark side.
There's a lot to take in from that opening.
Yes, indeed. The dark sign brands the undead. And in this land, the undead are corralled and led to the north. Where they are locked away to await the end of the world. This is your fate.
this would be our fate, if not for the kindness of that night. But now, that would be the fate of us if we were. But there's plenty more to talk about. So, as I said, the Age of Grey, the Age of the Ancient Dragons, who were released from Placidusax's control, and his basically when Farum Azula finally releases all the ancient dragons, they're the ones who establish, who basically just seek to consume, eat, survive, and thrive at the cost of everyone else, and do so expanding outwards, eventually even overwhelming the five of the remaining lords who had defeated the Elden Beast and brought about the end of the Age of Gold and the War of the Shattering. However, that brings us to Gwyn's age, the Age of Fire, which we are currently at the tail end of. So the Age of Fire ruled over by Gwyn, Nito, Witch of Izalith, Isa, and further Pygmy. Now, why is that important? Well, think about it for a moment. First off, the Further Pygmy is their contributions to the war against the dragons is completely disregarded. Like, they say that they helped, or at least that they were one of the lords they found, but we're never told how they fought or where they fought. Funny thing, that's a whole other thing. I could go through each game individually. I'm going to have to go through each game individually to give you the other. But this is the broad strokes of it. So, Gwyn takes the glory as the main leader, right? Then, effectively what we have is his Age of Fire. He's the one who names it, he's the one who's mainly in charge. Gwyn is the ruler of the Age of Fire, largely. Gwyn, the story of Dark Souls 1 is someone trying to create and make things last as long as possible. Someone trying to regain the glory of their big glory days. The sad truth is, Gwyn fails this utterly. But why did he do it, and how did he do it? Well, at the end of the Age of Grey, where the dragons are starting to be defeated, Gwyn and the other kingdoms he's allied with are starting to do fairly well. Up until one particular kingdom starts to fall into a problem. That, ladies and gentlemen, is, let's see, pull it up so I can show you. Alright. Okay, and yeah, put that back up. Because that is Dusk of Ulasil. Sorry, I completely forgot the name for a minute there. Okay, so Ulasil. Ulasil basically starts to fall to what we would know as the Abyss. Here's the thing. Non-existence is always a thing in the Souls universe. And it is slowly creeping in on everything. And effectively, the only thing that keeps it at bay is the power that the Elden Beast had. Which becomes tangible to the souls of the souls of the lords. You see where this comes full circle is the souls of the ones who defeated those who defeated the Elden Beast. Because you'll find they strangely well line up. For example, Nito, first among the dead. His entire motif resembles the life and death, the Duskborn ending, where it's finding life and death. That it would be Nito's soul of lords. That the soul of the Lord Nito took. The mending room, fixing things. That would be Gwyn's. Thus the lightning bolts being, a faith-based weapon, good against dragons, that they learned from dragons, actually, bringing that irony full circle, is where Gwyn would have the ability to fight against them. Then, the further pygmy, if we look even now, in our inventory, the dark sign signifies an accursed undead. They're not being figurative with this. That is a literal curse imbued on you, right? Well, that keeps you alive. That keeps you alive to keep suffering. That would be the fell curse of the Dung Eater that cursed humanity. So yes, the Dung Eater is so bad, he is the cause of the dark sign. See how these games can be connected? Then there was the Witch of Izalith and her Daughters of Chaos. The Lord of Frenzy Flame, after being bested, was, she studied the flame, harnessing it, powering it. And we get to see in this game just how wild it grows, the magma demons that it can create are all based on the flame of chaos. The only one we don't see proof of, and even that's vague, is the Age of Stars, but they left. They're gone. And Seath the Scale, it'd be disingenuous to say Seath the Scaleless was anything but a traitor to his people who had basically just sold out because of his fear of death. So, end of the day, what we do here in the game, in Dark Souls 1, is we follow the steps that are told to us. We leave here, and we try and get ourselves out to go complete the quest as a quote-unquote chosen undead to try and, we're never really told until the very end that our job is to link the fire. What are we linking the fire to? I'm going to ask again, so I'll give you some time to think about this. We're linking the fire. What do you link it to? Believe it or not, once again, the answer comes to us from Elden Ring. If you look up the Crucible Knights, they worship the Crucible of Souls, where all souls are mixed and melded together in death. effectively, what you're doing is having what Gwyn tried to do is link his power, his soul, to that crucible to use it as a fuel source to power himself. He couldn't handle it. No, nothing could. It wasn't designed to work that way. So it blew himself up. It obliterated everything. You see when you go to the when you get to the end of the game. This is, yeah. And effectively, we are, yeah. And it's also worth saying, people will tell you, okay, and then the big decision at the end is, do you link the fire? Which is basically the equivalent of taking two live high voltage wires, holding them in both your hands and letting the power flow through you to push back non-existence. Because that is what it is doing. You are basically using yourself as a conduit to prevent non-existence. And a lot of people would go, well, that's a huge decision. That means I'm really important. Yes and no. By virtue of even reaching the ability to make the decision, you will have added so many souls to the Crucible of Souls that it will fuel it even then. So, it's one of those, yeah, it matters, but not as much as you think. In anything, you're stuck just making a decision on what you believe is going to be worse. Because make no mistake, with everything you've done in a Souls game, you're not going to. You are undead, so you're technically immortal, which means you'll just live long enough to see yourself be hunted down by someone else and have them butcher you and take your souls. And eventually, somebody is going to link the fire with all those souls on the line, and the Age of Fire continues. What happens to those who are undead? They're hunted down and removed, and prevented from healing, and eventually are just hunted down and lost. So there is an end. You're just going to live to see it in the most painful methods possible. So, basically, what happens now then is we have our new age. Someone links or doesn't link the fire, and this would become what I would call the Age of Kings. Yep. Yeah, it would become the Age of Kings, who would have theoretically either link the fire or not, because eventually the kings will be deposed and then the next person will choose link the fire or not, link the fire or not. That actually ends where Dark Souls 1 goes. Dark Souls 1 is the start of the story, of of 1 through 3. The biggest thing to note is whether or not you link the fire. This is actually a trap built by Gwendolyn. After Gwendolyn, which is one of the children of Gwyn, Gwendolyn was the sort of the kid they didn't acknowledge but they did trust, who was so desperate for approval they would do anything. And yeah, we'll get into that the day I go over the story of Dark Souls 1 on its own. But that would be the end of there. Then we can actually jump, because what would come next? Dark Souls 1 is the beginning of the system where you either link the fire or don't, or somebody links the fire after you, and there are various kings that come in through. This would actually lead us to Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 2 has a bit of a different tone and problem with it. Because after the Age of Kings, we can immediately add on here, because this would be the Lost Ages. And this would be something like the Sunken King, the Iron King, or the Ivory King. These would be various figures of power that would look to link the fire again and again and create kingdoms in their name. It's worth noting, kingdoms would rise and fall, rise and fall, rise and fall. So much so that people would actually, once again, let's check the main opening, because this is actually one of the critical things about Dark Souls 2. I want you to watch the opening, and then we'll start talking about it. There's some detail stuff here that's easy to miss.
Perhaps you've seen it, maybe in a dream, a murky, forgotten land. A place where souls may mend your ailing mind. You will lose everything. Once branded, the symbol of the curse, an augur of darkness. Your past, your future, your very light. None will have meaning, and you won't even care. By then, you'll be something other than human. A thing that feeds on souls, a hollow. Long ago, in a walled-off land far to the north, a great king built a great kingdom. I believe they called it Drang Lake. Perhaps you're familiar. No, how could you be? But one day, you will stand before its decrepit gate without really knowing why. flames will burn in anguish. Time after time. For that is your fate. The fate of the cursed.
So, Dark Souls 2 has a major theme of you, the player, not knowing why. Why? You are just doing things because that is what you have seen to do. Which is a testament to the basic idea that at the end of the day, the reason that you're doing this is because it has become so ingrained for undead to be sent to certain places, so culturally built up, that you just follow along because you don't have anything else. You're cursed. And just to, again, the dark side. Induces death returning. Do what you must to gather the pieces, accepting them to some semblance of a whole, before the will to do so fade. Yeah. Before they mentioned how it isn't a curse mark. Now they're just telling you, keep going unless you'll lose the drive and just fall in place. This is because, over the course of the Lost Ages, so many kingdoms have risen and fallen to this curse. So many people have been so lost to it, as things grow darker and deeper. It simply is a case of everyone has been falling to this over and over and over and over. And life has just been going on and on. And we're just one of many undead. So the story of Dark Souls 2 is the story of one who explored and the history of those who came before. The truth of the matter is, the real story of Dark Souls 2 is the story of a being called Aldia, who effectively found a way to halt the cycle of linking the fire. Working with their brother, the current King Vendrick, they found a way to resist. And
what seems to be the ruckus?
Oh my, your face. The face of the curse. It's an undead. An undead has come to play.
yep.
They all end up here. All the ones like you. You spoke to that kind old dear, didn't you? You're finished. You'll go hollow. Yes, you'll become one of them. Hollows prey upon men, feast upon their souls. This is the fate of the cursed. What is your name?
At least you know your own name. Here's your reward for sharing. It's a human effigy. Take a closer look. Who do you think it's supposed to be? Think back, deep into your past.
This is to help you recognize who you were and help motivate you
It's
to
an
continue
effigy
to persist
of
the
you.
cycle. Alright. Alright.
All people come here for this.
Alright. So yes. Yep. So, the big thing to note is this is all simple. This has all happened before and will keep happening. Most importantly, one of the other things to note is out here in this area, underground, with water and stone trees spreading in every direction. And the place we are is called the place betwixt. A place between places that allows us access to the jewel. Now, it is worth noting that here in Dark Souls 2, like I said, the major theme was not knowing why you're here and not understanding how things worked. Now, I didn't talk too much about it at first, but back in Dark Souls 1, if you do the DLC, you'll go to the Kingdom of Ulasil. And there, if you get to the end of it, you'll find a place called you'll fight a being called Manus, Father of the Abyss. Now, many people consider the dark and the abyss in one and the same. Actually, I don't. I personally do not. They are two wholly separate things. The dark always existed. The dark is simply just that, the dark side of the world, non-existence effectively. Dark Souls 2, one of the major places we can go, I can show this off, in the DLCs. Now, when you defeat Manus in Dark Souls 1, it's revealed in this game that he actually didn't die per se. He was strong enough to effectively shatter himself, becoming several new beings. And as the kings lived on, I have binoculars on me, don't I? have a pair of binoculars. I really don't. Huh. Okay. Either way, it's hard to see her up there, but up there is one of the shards of Manus, who are effectively would actually be qualified as the actual gods of the age. So the lost ages are guided. Each of the major kings, the Sunken King, Iron King, they all are found and directed by a shard of Manus, embodying one of Manus's emotions, effectively giving you the true deities of the ages as they are led to ruin by each of them. Vendrick is no different. Vendrick eventually, his queen, manages to find him and takes her throne and is a beautiful woman that nobody trusted. To give you an idea, you can head to Vendrick's own castle. Just to show. Now, Drangleic Castle. Yeah, that's central. Alright. So, as we know, let's see. Should be back over through. Yep. Yeah. So I'll go show her off. You'd actually meet her here, but she's gone because boss fight. But back this way. Am I wearing the king's ring? Yeah. Okay, that makes this easier. Because with the authority, Vendrick had actually made an army of soldiers, effectively being that are effectively stone soldiers that he could control. This, ladies and gentlemen, would be the picture of the queen for Vendrick, the current king of Drangleic. Beautiful woman, somber, stylish, and if you get too close to the painting, it starts to curse you. Such is her power. However, it won't have an effect on us due to the item we have. Oh, King's Crown. Where is it? There it is. The Crown of Vendrick, King of Drangleic. What makes a king? Some say it is birthright, while others call it destiny. Perhaps it's not important, as long as a king's name serves to unite his people. This crown is only given to you and reveals some interesting things. First off, that it resists and prevents you from being cursed. It's how he could stand next to her and not be bothered. She was a being of absolute darkness, but she was still his queen. Vendrick also commanded absolute control of his soldiers. Now the point. After all, they're stone creations armed and powered by his control of magic. I mentioned earlier a name, Aldia. Aldia is Vendrick's younger brother. who the two of them worked together, realizing what his queen was, Queen Alana. She basically was a piece of the darkness looking to usurp his control over the, well, they call it the Throne of Want now, but it's basically how you link the fire. Now, effectively, the story of, so we have the ages, we talked about, where Vendrick had stopped the cycle. So the Lost Ages ends when someone finds and manages to regain Vendrick's crown and such. This power enables them to become a mighty king. Unfortunately, and makes them nearly godlike with an infinite potential for growth and strength. However, in doing so, in becoming that strong, they refuse to continue to link the fire and take a grand total of all their source and power away. And more importantly, they got to keep their souls. So no one else was feeding back into the Crucible of Souls, nor were they able to add to the, link the fire to put their own in. This is where the end of Dark Souls 2 is, the ending that is correct is Aldia confronting you about, well, if you're going to go beyond, you either link the fire or you don't. And in this case, normally you didn't have a choice in this game. If you didn't go for all the DLCs and you didn't face Aldia, you couldn't leave. You would just be forced to link the fire, to sit upon the Throne of Want, as they called it in this day and age. And then, unfortunately, someone came. The chosen undead, well, whatever undead did it, even went through all the dungeons and followed the paths of the other kings, the Iron King, the Ivory King, the Sunken King, managing to forge their crowns into something that gave him some semblance of humanity. And that would lead us out of Dark Souls 2, because Dark Souls 2's story is effectively someone who didn't know why they were there, pushing beyond and finding answers, confronting Aldia and telling them basically the whole system to fuck off, leaving it in tatters. Without someone to refuel, reality started to close in. As this person, whoever this king was, walked beyond light and dark. And that would lead us out of Dark Souls 2 and into Dark Souls 3. Oh, yeah, I actually have the disc version. My bad. Give me a sec. Gotta pop it in. Alright. Alright. And this will be our, once again, Dark Souls 3. And this, ladies and gentlemen, will be the age, our newest age. Once again, once again, the new game.
Yes, indeed. It is called Lothric, where the transitory lands of the Lords of Cinder converge. In venturing north, the pilgrims discover the truth of the old words. The fire fades, and the lords go without thrones. When the link of fire is threatened, the bell tolls, unearthing the old lords of Cinder from their graves. Aldrich, saint of the deep, Saren's undead legion, the Abyss Watchers. And the reclusive lord of the profaned capital. Yon the giant. Only in truth, the lords will abandon their thrones. And the unkindled will rise. Nameless, accursed undead, unfit even to be cinder. And so it is that ash seeketh embers.
So, our newest age. First would be the Age of Cycles, where Vendrick would put a halt to. Leading to the god becoming the undead champion, the god becoming the undead champion who manages to take Vendrick's crown and become basically the god of the time. This would then lead to the Age of Kindling, where the Lords of Cinder would attempt to preserve the Age of Fire by linking it themselves. Unfortunately, none of them actually had, despite this, faster and faster, the layer of non-existence kept sinking in. So sadly, the Age of Kindling would lead to the Age of Failures. This is a brief time where several attempts are made for people to link the fire, and it doesn't end up going well. So much so that, yeah, this is fine. Because the ruler of the Age of Failed Ears, or rather, I call him that because he is the vessel or the principal version of it. The Cemetery of Ash. Yep. Ashen Flask, nice. Okay. We'll go meet the god of the Philippines. Or at least the embodiment of it. Alright. Real quick, throw out some firebombs. Okay. Alright. Because the embodiment of the Age of Failures is here. Here with the blade. Here he had a weapon. We won't get his name here, but we'll handle this first. This coiled sword embedded in him. Yep. Okay, no, there it is. You'd explain. Everything Gundyr was actually, would be, in my opinion, considered the ruler of the Age of Failures, where they kept trying to have champions rise up to link the fire, and so many failed that they were back to using anyone and everyone who had become undead in hopes that they would be able to gather the souls necessary to link the fire. But Gundyr would be the embodiment of this, because Gundyr actually had that weapon of his actually has infinite durability and is fairly strong. He was set up for victory and still failed. Not necessarily through any fault of his own, but he still was a failure. He was one of countless failures. This would lead us for the Dark Souls 3 protagonist to take over. And you would fight and go through all this, and whether or not you link the fire, it really doesn't matter. Or whatever ending you pick in Dark Souls 3, because they are exclusionary, but at the same breath, it almost doesn't matter. There's not enough left to linking the fire. Reality is at the end. The story of Dark Souls 3 is effectively the last gasp of life. It's why being here at the end doesn't matter. No matter what you do, no matter where you go, you have to come here and you have to face the last of the embers. And when you do, whether you link the fire or not, that's the end. Yep. You face the culmination of everyone who had sacrificed themselves. And you bring it to an end. And you either add on your own to that commonality, or you snuff it out. But in snuffing it out, you can even offer the accursed humanity a chance to live. Or you can even explore this scrap heap, this culmination of every kingdom that has fallen. The truth is, Dark Souls 3 is the story of the end, of futility brought to its final tragic culmination. The dreg heap of existence built up and pushed away. And it doesn't matter what you do. This was the end. Simply put, this was the end. Even hope shattered and was worn away, leaving us with the dreg heap. Only a few sparse undead left in an endless abyss and emptiness. It didn't matter how far you went or where you went. This was the end. Dark Souls 3 is the apocalypse. And that's what the age it tells us of. age of the apocalypse, where everything goes quiet and still, where everything dies, ruled over by nobody. And the only God is the natural darkness. Even the abyss is stilled, and thus the end. We'll fight, we'll free, we'll die, and there were some who were seeking to stall the end, but even then we put it all to the blade. This was the inevitable fate of all things. The heat death of the universe, one might say. But yeah, this is the most prime example in place to show that yes, there truly, at the end of it all, nothing remains. This is the end of the souls. And it's appropriate. So much blood, sweat, and tears. And it's all brought to the end. There are some who cling on to it, hoping to rebuild or create something. But those are half mad, and there isn't enough people to really cling to it. The story of Dark Souls 3 is largely of a final last-ditch effort to try and hold back the walls of reality, to hold back the walls of inevitability. But it simply cannot be. You're here to bring it out and maybe bring one last hurrah for a little time. But even then, by seeing places like the Dreg Heap and here at Philionor's Rest and beyond, this is the end. That is the end of Dark Souls 3. The story, it is a story of just concluding final business. That is basically it. Even the descendants of the furtive pygmy are no more. The souls of lords are, well, collected and united in you. What scattered and shattered pieces remain. But it's not enough. Even if you link the fire, it's just going to be temporary. But yeah. Funnily enough, though, the only thing really left out here is like one servant and then like one or two black knights. Because Gwyn's damn black knights could survive anything. They're like cockroaches. But yeah. Much of what you do in Dark Souls 3 is bringing to rest the remnants of what remained. Effectively, the story of Dark Souls 3 is two princes tried to hold it all back. The twin princes here tried to stall the end of the world, using their own accursed immortality due to their being undead. They tried to stall it all, using their position as princes to hold everything back. But eventually an undead would come, capable of undoing all their efforts. That's just inevitability, really. Nice. Nice. these would be the repercussions of them trying to stall the end of the world. These would be malformed versions of undead that would hover around, basically like vultures, moths swarming to a flame. And in the end, it didn't matter. We would bring the ending that would come. And that would actually bring an end to Dark Souls 3. It's a long game, but it's a lot of fun. But in the end, it's all about resolving, cleaning up the final remnants, hoping that it would be enough to start the cycle again. But with what the Dark Souls 2 protagonist took, it's not enough. But the Dark Souls 2 protagonist would be what would lead to here in the next game, which would be Dark Souls, which would be Demon Souls, which is where our next age begins. We could call it, wrong page, the Age of Dreams. And the undead champion, also known as the Old One. His form would change and morph over time, and this would lead us to there, where life would continue on. Man was granted soul on the second day with the clarity. Upon the earth was planted an irrevocable poison, a soul-devouring tumor. Great demon, as it would be known. Would take
King Alant the 12th by channeling the power of souls, brought unprecedented prosperity to his northern kingdom of Boletaria. That is, until the colorless deep fog swept across the land. Boletaria was cut off from the outside world, and those who dared penetrate the deep fog never returned. But Valifax of the Royal Twin Fangs broke free from the fog and told the world of Boletaria's plight. That the old King Alant had roused the Old One, the great beast below the Nexus, from its eternal slumber, and that a colorless fog had swept in, unleashing terrible demons. The demons hunt down men and claim their souls. Those who lose their souls lose also their minds. The mad attack the sane, and chaos reigns. Valifax also spoke of the enticing power of the demon souls. Each time a demon claims a human soul, the demon's own soul is invigorated by the life force, and the power of a mature demon soul is beyond human imagination. The legend spread quickly. Mighty warriors lured by the possibilities braved the fissure to breach the accursed land, but none have returned. Pure of the Twin Fangs, yet the silent chief, Saint Urbane, Scurva the Wanderer, the sixth Saint Astraea with her night Garl Vinland, and Sage Frake the Visionary. The colorless deep fog slowly creeps beyond Boletaria's borders. Humankind faces a slow and steady extinction. The deep fog will eventually swallow all lands near and far. But Boletaria has one final hope. A lone warrior who has braved the baneful fog. Oh, has the land found its savior? Or have the demons found a new slave?
Soul of the lost withdrawn from its vessel. Let strength be granted so the world might be mended. Soul of the lost withdrawn from its vessel. Let strength be granted so the world might be mended. So the world might be mended. This is the Nexus. It holds together the northern land of Boletaria. Thou canst not quit the Nexus, but the 5 archstones will guide thee to the outer lands.
So, the story of Demon Souls is pretty straightforward, but in how it's connected to the others is kind of interesting. Because this is an age of, I would call the age of the usurpers. Those who usurped power from those who had it. And note, though there are 6 archstones, you can only access 5 of them. And again, that's 4, which would be similar to the souls needed to, once again, that have been recycled through like Demon Souls 2, to link the fire. So, again, the Archstone of the Covetous King likely wins. The Digger King. Well, that one's not as obvious. But Queen of the Tower, our Ivory Tower Queen. That would obviously be like Seath the Scaleless' soul. The Shadow Men would be something, would likely be Nito's. The Chieftain might be like the Further Pygmy. Because we've seen that their souls get recycled time and time again, each time someone links the fire. In this particular case, rather than linking the fire, the souls may have been used as an anchor point for a spell to push back on non-existence. Thus, we can't travel to these places directly physically, we have to warp to them. So, that's what... And then in Demon Souls, yeah, the ruler and vessel would be King Alant, who was backed up by the Great Old One. So, actually, we can modify what we had before. So, the vessel and ruler of this age would be King Alant, the 12th. And this actually would be the age of usurpers. Those who stole power, hoping from the Great Old One, and using the power granted by the Great Old One. Effectively, and in this game, you can either become the usurper yourself, or you can have it put to sleep. Now, if I'm honest, I honestly don't see either ending. In this case, the ending does make a bit of a difference, but if I'm honest, you can still go either way. But yeah. So, that's most of Demon Souls' story, because then the rest of it is just exploring the world and fighting your way to the demon, who is actually, like they say, buried beneath the Nexus, which is literally right here. And then you confront him, and then you either you put it to sleep with the maiden, and then she slumbers with him. Which would lead us to Bloodborne, actually. Because if either the demon goes back to sleep, right? To dream. Peace then rules over the world. That leaves us, yep. So, honestly, that's really about it. Demon Souls is a relatively straightforward story. Its role in the greater narrative is just purely giving you a status point that humanity had actually been living relatively peaceful until they chose to break the seal and wake them up. This is also indicative of there are multiple of these creatures out there, these old ones, like the champion undead, who could grant you power, but you're going to become a monster in doing so. They can spread the curse, because remember, it's the curse of the undead in humanity is the seedbed curse that can spread to others. Then, that brings us to finally, back all the way at the end to Bloodborne. Bloodborne's story actually has two bits. First, it is the realization that I can't show it off. I don't have a save on this one. Basically, okay, there are two ages in Bloodborne. And let me just use the bathroom real quick, and we'll be on to that. Sorry about that. Okay. So the final two ages we would see are going to be first the Age of Peace. The first time we will have this. The Age of Peace, after King Allant is cast down and the Old One is defeated, effectively, then we have the Age of Peace, one way or the other, and life goes on. There's no major ruler, but there is a god there. There is an Old One. This is one of the few times Kozum, or Kazum as some pronounce it, and otherwise known as formerly Ronnie. There's one of my big ones for you. Ronnie returns and comes back to our world in an utterly different form after contending with the greater realm. The results we don't know, and we will never know, because immediately following the Age of Peace, for people to grow, learn, and her to re-examine her people, we find the Age of Blood, ruled over by the Hunters, and the god empowering them is the Moon Presence, otherwise known as the Last Tarnished. Yeah, both Ronnie and whatever Tarnished served her became inhuman creatures in their journey among the stars, or at least unrecognizable as human. Ronnie sought to peacefully coexist and study and learn and support humanity. Unfortunately, a group of hunters effectively betrayed Ronnie, ambushing her and causing her to be killing her. And in vengeance, the Tarnished, the last Moon Presence, tortured the hunters, causing an Age of Blood, turning Yharnam into its own private, personal revenge, for which the very people themselves were the fuel. That's most of what happens in Bloodborne, is you being held responsible for the death of Kos and the betrayal of those great ones. It's why you have to defeat the Moon Presence to escape. You either end up becoming its puppets, you either end up becoming fighting it to bring it to an end, or transcending, and to do so, transcend your own. As such, Bloodborne remains the end point. Whatever fate you choose, well, that kicks off the next stage, and we haven't seen that. I've brushed over a lot of this, and I'm sure I've done too brief on so much, but I figure a 3-hour video on just figuring out the basic outline for working through the story and the story of the Soulsborne series. So, I'm pretty happy with this. I hope you all are as well, and I want to thank you all for joining me. I have been the Ephemeral One, and this has been, well, my exploration of one of my favorite series. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and I just figured now is as good a time as any. Feel free to join me in a few minutes when we continue on to the Summer Games Fest, but for now, thank you all, and I'll see you next time on something else. Bye for now, folks. Bye for now.